And Kathy and I channeled the whole community in building this park. And we're just delighted that everyone is here. I have a few words that I want to share. The first, of course, is gratitude. And the first one goes out to Mother Nature, who's frankly pretty pissed with us right now. But I think she demonstrated a whole lot of forgiveness today. But let's not be fooled that this is what it will always be like if we don't change our ways. So anyway, thank you, Mother Nature, first and foremost. The second one is Kathy. Thank you for making sure that the details happen behind planning something like this. So, and then I also want to thank the Methow Conservancy for helping to pull this day off and have people stationed in dangerous places directing traffic. I also want to thank the Methow Valley Interpretive Center for the work they did to support this day and the great braiding sweetgrass kind of projects they had going on over there. Thank you. And then, of course, those over in the hot corner, thank you for the delicious salmon. And Sophia and Kathy at Arrowleaf Bistro, like they had nothing else to do this weekend, which is their grand opening of Arrowleaf Bistro, having taken it over from Joanne and John. Thank you for the non-salmon goodies. And a little side note about the salmon, my friend Mark Titus, who those of you that were at the documentary showing last night of his film, The Breach, Mark also has access to delicious Bristol Bay sockeye salmon, which, as many of you probably know, there were about 80 million fish came back this year up there. So it's about as sustainable a fishery as you could imagine. And so thank you, Mark, for bringing that salmon to us. Mark, also, if you're curious about Mark's work as a documentarian, as a source of great salmon, there's a little QR code sitting over here, and you can learn about Mark, and it's totally worth it to do so. So thank you, Mark. Let me see, did I miss anybody? Probably, and if I did, I'm sorry. But I especially want to thank all of you for supporting this and being part of this community. So there are two things I wanted to talk about. First of all, this notion of coming home. And a couple of people have asked me, why, what do we mean by coming home? And there's four events or, events that I think from the very beginning defined what Homestream Park was about. And the first one really started with the coming home of the salmon that return up this river. And it was sort of the first inspiration behind the park was to honor the salmon and the river. And then also in the process of doing that, I reached out to Richard Hart because I'd been inspired by some sculpture that you can see as you're coming up the Columbia River by the BB Bridge. And I reached out to Richard Hart and I said, can you make an introduction? Who is this person? Do you know them? And can you make an introduction? And Richard, of course, did. And the individual I'm talking about is Smoker Marchand, who I texted with Smoker yesterday. Unfortunately, he couldn't be here. And when we met with Smoker to share this vision of public art in this place and the reason behind this place, he was so generous and so inspired. And we talked about what would be good subject. And so I had a vision of this spawning salmon, to signify, obviously, that part of the coming home that I first thought about when I thought about this place. And then Smoker said, he kind of started talking about, well, you know the history, obviously, of the Methow. And, this place, it wasn't our permanent home, but it was our seasonal home. And how about we create a scene of sort of the native fish camp, their seasonal camp, all around their connection with salmon. And so that installation at the south end of the park, which is entitled Coming Home, was the second sort of validation or whatever that this notion of coming home was important. And then when we thought about a grand opening and how do we do this authentically, I forget the connections, but from the Methow Valley Interpretive Center to Crystal Miller to Mark Miller, we met with Mark down here, and I'll keep it shorter than our meeting with Mark because that went about 4 hours. But he talked about, he said, what you're building here is you're building a home. And it's a home that that was lost years ago. And we were thinking about trying to figure out what he was talking about. And Mark said, it is our ancestors, the spirits of our ancestors, who equally lost their homeland when they were thrown out. Physically, when the Methow people were removed from the valley. And he said, so what this represents, from his view, was an opening, a reopening of the spirit homeland. So it was a coming home for the spirit world, and that was pretty powerful to hear. The last event, which happened this year, and going back to the Methow Conservancy, was the land transaction to give back to the Colville tribes, the Confederated tribes of the Colville Reservation, for the benefit of the Methow people, to give back land, an incredible piece of land up the Chewuk River, 1.6 miles of riverfront, that was completed this spring, late this spring. And perhaps, in my mind, the most momentous land transaction ever in this valley, post-white settlement. So, and that represents a coming home. I mean, a true physical coming home. So that's, the long-winded answer of why we call it coming home. Sorry, this is longer than I expected, but we've got time. There's more salmon, I understand. Right, Randy? So I wanted to reflect on the last few years, even though there was this little COVID hiatus, on what's been the most impactful and meaningful thing to me being a part of Homestream Park. And it's all about the kids. And I want to share an example of what I mean by that. Mark Miller, where's Mark? Mark right here. Mark and I have been leading tours of mostly fourth graders, but they've been from Orville and Omak and Brewster or Pateros. And it's wonderful because these kids have never been on a field trip, right? They're fourth graders and they didn't do field trips during COVID. So a lot of them, this was their first field trip. So Mark and I had a shtick that we did, which was really kind of fun. We gathered the kids. The last one, this is with the Omak kids, 120 kids. We did it in 3 groups of 40. Fourth graders, last week of school, right? Good luck getting their attention. But there's a way to do it, and Mark is the way to do it. And here's what we do. We gather the kids, and I try to impress them with, like, yeah, I've kind of considered this place home for, 30 years. 30 years. And then I turn to Mark and I go, how about you, Mark? How long have you considered this place home? And when I said 30 years, the kids were like, wow. And Mark would say, well, I don't know, about 1,000, 10,000 years? And that was it. The kids, Mark had their attention. And I think, and then what we would do is we'd lead them on tours of the park and sort of stop at each of the stations and talk about the significance of what they represented. And Mark was great. He would bait them. One of them not so much the safety first thing, but anyway, I'll get to that. And he would start out before we had we would start a program with the kids. He'd say, "Okay, I want you to think about how does a tree eat a salmon?" Right? And so these are fourth graders, and they're like, I don't know, they'd shout out, I don't know, with their teeth, with their mouth, they're joking around. But it's a good question. How does a tree eat a salmon? So that got them thinking. And then as we turn the corner and you come back and we've got these 9 boulders that represent the dams, he'd say, all right, here's 30 fourth graders. And he said, all right, you're all salmon. You got no hands. And you got to get over these dams, these boulders. And I would look and, oh God, there's going to be blood. But they would do it. And what was interesting, some of them you can't do without your hands. And I saw a couple of times where a kid was trying to shimmy up the bigger rock, and another came behind and boosted him. So the kid didn't need to use his hands. And I don't know, that was kind of reflective of, the good humans that are trying to help those salmon over those dams. And my point in all of this is to say, after an experience like that, with somebody like Mark, who is so engaging and so wonderful, is that you are leaving a lasting impression on the next generation. The last thing about that day was we had Bruce Morrison and Ashley Lodato, when in her prior job at Methow Arts, or she might have been transitioning, they had an art project for these kids. And Bruce had done these cutouts of coho salmon. And the kids colored one side and then wrote something. What inspired you after today? What are you going to leave with today? And these are fourth graders, and it's, they're excited to go to Sherry's, so keeping their attention was not easy, but they did it, and it was beautiful. And I'm going to end with some of the things they wrote on the back of these art projects. I've got it. So, waiting for the sound to go. Save the fish, they are important. I like that one. So the other one was, I like fish. Fishes matter, love salmon. This one's, it's kind of Dr. Seuss-ish. Go, 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 you can do it, finish that journey. This one, I love this. If fishes were wishes, spawn, coho, spawn. And this is more heartfelt, which is, it's a letter. Dear fish, I am deeply sorry that us people ruined your life cycle. Please forgive us. And the last two were, we miss you. And the one that matters most is, please come back. So anyway, thank you for letting me ramble.